Alrighty. Hello, my name is Declan. I did my poster on behavior of food caching in corvids and its overall beneficiality. Um, Behavior of food caching in crows and corvid species is a very unique, interesting behavior that is not found in many other animals. Having this type of ability to retrieve food, store it in places for sometimes a later use is something that is almost extremely exclusive to just corvid species and crows. Um, it may arise many questions on how this behavior functions and its overall beneficiality. If it's worth the time, if it's worth the energy, if the positives outweigh the overall negatives of the specific behavior. So I did a lot of research on food caching, looked up a lot of peer-reviewed journals and stuff, and unfortunately there wasn't any direct studies on like survivalship rating or like survival rates of crows in correlation to food caching. So I kind of had to approach this in a different way. Um, I mostly looked at studies that showed how food caching functions, and if these functions require high amounts of energy and high amounts of time. And if they do, then I kind of assume that is a beneficial behavior as a behavior that's not beneficial, an animal wouldn't be participating in with high amounts of energy, with high amounts of time, and devoting a lot of energy to specific parts of the behavior. Um, so if the food catching behavior of crows is complex with certain preferences and requires high amounts of time, energy, and brain power, the behavior is most likely beneficial in the individual. So I hypothesize that this is a beneficial behavior in crows, and that these following studies will kind of show um, how it is and how these animals devote time, exhibit preferences, um, and overall just make this a beneficial behavior for the animal. So the first study I kind of looked at was the food storage behavior of the northwestern crow. This was a observation type of study that observed the common components of northwestern crow catching behavior on, I believe it was Middle Natch Island in British Columbia. Um, there was no direct manipulation. The researchers actually just observed the type of food that was being cached by the birds to see if there was a preference, and actually in what substrate these um, these birds were caching their food in. So the type of food item that was being cached in the substrate it was being cached in. The data on the cache objects and the data on the cache objects was recorded in the table. That's kind of condensed here in figure one, which is in study one. And down here, and it kind of just gives a number count and percentage of all the objects that were observed to be cached in crow species. It's kind of hard to see, but the number one object that was preferred by crows was a clam, and this accounted for about 72.1% of all the cached objects by the animal. The closest runner-up was crabs, which accounted for 6.7. So these animals definitely preferred clams, which must have provided more nutritional value and spending more time looking for a preferred type of food would definitely show that this behavior is worth investing in, is worth being beneficial to. There wasn't an accompanying kind of table with the cache substrate, but the researchers did find that grass was the most common substrate as storage sites for these birds, and it consisted of 53% of the total storage locations. And the next most common substrate was moss. Moss with 21.3%. So having these preferences requires time to look for these preferences. It requires energy to look for specific ones. So it must be an overall net positive to um, participate in this type of behavior if these animals are preferencing certain types of substrates, certain types of cast objects. Study 2 was kind of an opposite study of study 1, not opposite, similar study but in a different location. They found also a very interesting result. So this was about American crows cache less preferred nuts. So basically, it was a different researcher, but they did the same type of experiment. They observed crows in Davis, California. It was just a single researcher. I think it was 146 crows that were observed, uh, and the different sizes of walnuts and stuff that they um, took and cached was observed as well. So this is kind of a different type of habitat in study 1. So study 1 is more of a coastal habitat. Study 2 is kind of doing the same type of experiment but in inland habitat. Statistical analyses were done on the data, and the results were listed in a text, so there's not a accompanying figure with this specific um, study, but it's still very useful. They did two-tailed t-tests were conducted on the recording data using statistical softwares. After completing, they found that the crows in this inland habitat preferred English walnuts, much like the crows in the coastal habitat preferring a certain type of food. They preferred English walnuts, and they tended to choose these walnuts that were heavier. 25% heavier was a significant amount of the walnuts that they ended up choosing. And they preferred nuts these preferred nuts appeared to be consumed as they were found, and less preferred nuts were more likely to be taken away and cached. So this is showing another type of preference for this type of behavior, spending time looking for specific walnuts, choosing which preferred walnuts to cache, which preferred ones to keep. So definitely investing time and definitely investing energy in this type of behavior that kind of supports the fact that it is beneficial for these animals, possibly for a variety of reasons that we can get into discussion. Study 3 was actually a very interesting study. It not stopped the trend, but it's different in study 1 and 2 as this involved kind of direct manipulation with the crows and their cache sites. So this kind of examined whether or not northwestern crows use random search or use memorization to locate their previously buried patches or caches. So this was actually conducted on the same island as Study 1, however, so that Mittlanach Island in British Columbia. One of the researchers is actually the same as the first study, so they were definitely interested in crows, definitely did multiple studies on them. So this study actually had, I believe, 8 or so experiments within it. I chose the 4th and the 5th experiment. They showed kind of an interesting aspect of this feeding behavior. I mean, of the food caching behavior. So for the first study, experiment 4, the researcher directly manipulated the food cache sites of observed crows. So the researcher placed a single stick 15 centimeters away from a select amount of observed cache sites to see if the crows memorized the surrounding area to aid in relocating their caches. And after completing the study, the researcher observed that caches with sticks placed 15 centimeters away significantly reduced the ability of the crows to find their caches. So this kind of gets into a really interesting thing about random search about memory. He did a follow-up study, experiment 5, which is the next one. It was exactly identical as experiment 4, but utilized placing the stick 30 centimeters away instead of 15 to see if these crows memorized the immediate surrounding area or a large scope around the cache site. So for this one, this was very interesting. There was no significant reduction in their ability to find these caches in the 30 centimeter away stuff. So the researcher assumed that the experiments 4 and 5 show that crows only memorize the immediate surroundings of their specific cache sites, and the introduction of a stick that is further away from the cache doesn't confuse them. So it definitely shows that memorization is used in relocating these caches, but it's only immediate surrounding. It's kind of shown here in figure 3. There's a bar graph of all the experiments, and if the crows retrieve their food caches, and if the crows don't retrieve the food caches. So it's kind of hard to see, but the fourth experiment is shown there, and it shows that the retrieved amount is significantly lower than the not retrieved amount in 4, and that the retrieved amount is significantly higher in experiment 5 than the not retrieved amount. So this definitely shows that this behavior uses energy, it uses memorization, which is something that requires energy in animals. So it must be beneficial to these animals in the long run for them to be devoting this time, them to be devoting this type of memorization for their food caches. And the last study, study 4, kind of was an interesting kind of extra study, and it's about object caching in 3 different types of corvid species. So this was a comparison study. It was conducted on the caching ability of numerous species within the corvid family. The species included the New Caledonian crows, ravens, and jackdaws. So the researchers presented each of these 3 different types of species with numerous objects. Some of them were spherical, some of them were stick-like. And then, as they were introduced, the researchers observed if the species touched the object, if they moved the object, and if they cached the object. And after conducting the study, the researchers created this graph, which is shown here in figure 4. It has touched, it has moved, it has cached, and the dark bar without any lines in it is the ravens. The dark bar with the lines in it is the jackdaws, and the white bars are the crows. So as you can see, the crows were found to have the relatively low amounts of touched and moved, and were slightly higher than the ravens in the cached side. And the ravens kind of led in all the touch, in pretty much all of these experiments. The ravens touched more of the objects, moved more of the objects, cached more of the objects. So it's definitely more prevalent in ravens, but there was an interesting observation that the researcher found, and that was the crows found to have the second highest number of cached objects behind the ravens, obviously. But further examination showed that the crows manipulated stick-like objects more than other species. And this researcher got to thinking and suggested that the crows may participate in caching of tool-like objects, long stick-like objects that they can use to kind of obtain other types of food, such as ants and other small insects. And that crows may use this type of food caching behavior in different ways, such as tool caching. So the same basis as food caching, but instead of caching food, they're caching specific tools that could be useful for them in the long run. If food caching is beneficial in the way that we think, then it would make sense that they would use this type of behavior in other types of ways to further benefit them in the long run. So if that catching is useful to the organism, and studies suggest that tool caching is present in organisms, then this type of behavior must be useful to the animal and is useful for investing their time, investing their energy. So overall, these studies help conceptualize many of the components that are associated with food caching behavior in crows. The crows had different preferences depending on their environments. They utilize memorization in food caching, and they have different preferences in multiple different scenarios, as previously said, with the environments. And all these studies kind of support the evidence of crow food caching to be present in complex behavior in a species that is beneficial. Crows put large amounts of energy and memorization in searching for specific preferences in regard to food caching, that the behavior must be beneficial to the species in a long run. All this energy, all this time devoted, the costs and benefits. If this behavior was not having positives that outweighed the negatives, it would not be beneficial for the survival of these animals to exhibit and spend this energy, this time, if the animal wasn't getting positive consequences in return of this behavior. So some hypothesized reasons for the food caching is that it must aid in against competition against other animals, and that they can take away food that is then taken off the kind of market, if you say, for other animals that are competing for the same resource. And it kind of allows for crows to have an extra food reserve when resources may be scarce. So competition is super high. Resources are getting very scarce. Having their own set of food caches that are not known to other individuals allows them to kind of have a surplus, an extra food reserve to increase their survival rate, which is definitely beneficial for corvids and crows as a whole. So overall, these studies show that food caching is a complex behavior, an energy required behavior, a time required behavior, and it is and must be beneficial for the animal to invest all this time, this energy, as the positives must outweigh the cost of investing all this. So food caching in corvids is definitely beneficial for the overall species and the survival rate of the individual as well. That's about all I got. Literature cited is down there in the right, and thank you.